Welcome to this session on agroecology, nutrition, and healthy planet. Um, this discussion is basically being prompted by the complex world which we are living in today. It's a changing world that is complex in its nature and proving to be quite difficult. We've seen in Malawi recently the cyclone Freddy, what it can do as a result of climate change. We've seen houses being damaged, lives lost, and putting the country at risk in terms of hunger because the fields that we expected to get food from have all been washed away. And these are the problems that we see, not just in terms of food security, but we see increasing prices as the prices go for fertilizers, the prices are going up for pesticides, and again, threatening the food situation. In Malawi, we've had the issues with fertilizers, and yet we depend on maize for food, which is very much produced with fertilizers. The recent COVID-19 has also taught us a lesson that indeed we cannot rely on importing because the supply chains can be disrupted. And this is again, it's been seen with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, which we see can really cause a lot of problems. Many are asking, shall we continue doing business as usual? Can we feed this world with conventional agriculture? And some of the responses have been going towards the agroecology. And there are arguments around it. And today we want to explore this topic. Can agroecology be an answer? Now, before we start this discussion, we just want to acquaint each other with the concepts of agroecology. And with me, I have a professor from Cornell. This is Rachel Besnoke. Please. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us, Rachel. So Rachel is a professor in global development from the Cornell University. She has much experience in doing research on agroecology, including Malawi. She's working with the Soul Food and Healthy Community Organization in northern Malawi and has done quite a number of publications on agroecology with a focus in Malawi as well. And I think she brings us some experience on her understanding about agroecology. Rachel?
Thanks so much, Frank, and I'm really honored to be here today. And in light of Kumi's address yesterday, I'm going to try not to talk too much like a professor, but really try to make this concept real to you. And to do so, I'm going to draw from the long-term work that I've done in collaboration with researchers and with farmers in northern and central Malawi, but also from the work I had a chance to serve on the high-level panel of experts with the UN, where we co-authored a report on agroecology. So I had a chance to look at the scientific literature more broadly to understand. So what is this concept? Let's start with the beginning. Agroecology is an approach to food systems that brings in ecological principles and social principles, social justice principles. And you might think of it in a way as an approach to food systems that addresses power in the food system. And so I'm going to walk you through some of those principles. So next slide. Bear with me. So if you think about the field level, if you're a farmer, if you're growing food, some of those principles will be familiar. Things like recycling of water and organic matter and energy. Things like supporting soil health, supporting animal health and welfare. Things like biodiversity. Fostering biodiversity is a core principle of agroecology. In addition, synergy, building synergy in the system. So having animals and crops together in the same farm so that the crops can, so the crops can benefit from animal manure and the animals might eat pests that are in the crops. So these are strategies, and they include a whole host of different practices that vary by place, because agroecology is a system that is adapted to the local ecosystem and the local culture. But another core feature of agroecology that differentiates it, that makes it different from other approaches to food systems, is that it is focused on drawing from local and indigenous knowledge and practices, drawing from their experience and co-creating a food system together. So it's not just about science, but it does include a lot of science. So there's a paper from 2009 that talked about agroecology being a science, a set of practices, and social movements. So agroecology goes beyond the farm and the field to think about creating diversified food systems that farmers have economic diversification, connecting farmers and producers directly through farmers markets and other methods so that the farmer benefits more directly from the sale of food, but also so producers know where their food comes from. Addressing equity in the food system, fairness at the household level, community level, and even at the international level. Are people getting a fair price for what they're growing? And are consumers able to afford food that they're buying? And really participation in the food system, so sort of democratizing the food system. That's why agroecology is different from other or goes beyond something like climate smart agriculture, because it's about power dynamics in the food system and really addressing the inequities in the food system. And that's part of what makes it a social movement as well as a science. And the last principle is land and natural resource governance. Do people have access and control over seeds, over land, over water, the core things that we need to have in order to produce food? So that's agroecology in a nutshell. And as part of the UN report, we did an assessment of the literature. What is the evidence that agroecology can improve food security and nutrition? We looked at the last 20 years of scientific literature, and we found 56 that met the criteria of actually measuring food security and nutrition outcomes. And the majority of those found positive impacts on food security and nutrition. There was only one that found negative impacts. The other were neutral. And the more complex the system was, so it wasn't just growing more crops, for example, crop diversity, but it was actually incorporating farmer-to-farmer learning or addressing social inequities. So the more complex the system was, the more likely it was to lead to improvements in food security and nutrition. I forgot to check my time, so Frank, you can warn me. So what about the pathways by which agroecology can improve nutrition? Well, one simple way is by having more plants and animals in your farm system. You have more diversity of foods to eat. And if you're protecting forests, you have wild foods as well. So it's not just about cultivated foods in an agroecological system. But there are other pathways. You might have improved livelihoods if farmers are getting a better price for their crop, which you can then use to buy diverse foods. If you're addressing inequities in households, then there may be more fair, diverse foods that everyone in the household is eating. And if people are drawing on their indigenous foodways, they may be eating a more diverse plate of foods that draws from those indigenous and local foodways. So there's a range of different ways that agroecology can improve nutrition. So I want to highlight some of the evidence that we have generated from scientific research here in Malawi and in Tanzania to illustrate what it means in practice, because that's a lot of conceptual thinking that I've just walked you through. And we've done, and by we, it's a big group, but I'm just one member. But we've done research with 400 households who were selected for being highly food insecure, and we did pre-post comparison. And we also worked with 6,000 households in northern and central Malawi, doing control versus intervention and pre-post design. And then we did a similar kind of sister study in Tanzania with ActionAid Tanzania and with Tanzanian researchers. And in that case, we also did the pre-post design and control intervention design. And in all of those studies, they did a range of different practices. Farmers chose what they wanted to experiment with. So they did agroforestry, They might have done legume intercropping. Some of them did crop diversification, sometimes bringing in indigenous crops that they had previously not grown, and integration of animals and crops into the system, use of compost, and farmer-to-farmer exchanges was a core part of the interventions. And we also had a component that was focused on the social equity and nutrition dimensions of agroecology. So we had developed a curriculum, because this is long-term work. So we had developed a curriculum that incorporated gender and social equity and nutrition into it, as well as agroecology. And that included small group discussions and theater and recipe days and other strategies for addressing those features. And in all of these studies, we found evidence of, after controlling for other factors that affect food security and nutrition, we found evidence of improvements in food security and in nutrition. So for example, children in agroecology households in Tanzania had 1.48 times more likely to have a minimally acceptable diet, and 3 minutes, and which is good because I think this is my second last slide. And in Malawi, women's dietary diversity was higher, and a household was about a third less likely to be severely food insecure. And there were multiple pathways by which people obtained that food security and nutrition. And one that I want to highlight is households saved money by not purchasing fertilizer, and they invested that money in dry season vegetable gardens, in buying animals, and in other ways to increase their food security. And they also shared seed and food within the community after improving their food security. So it was an impact felt community-wide, not just at the household level. And crucially, gender relations in these studies were crucial for improving food security and nutrition. So in Malawi, families where the spouses talk to each other about farming were 2.4 times more likely to improve their food security and nutrition. So just to wrap up, it's a holistic food production system, and it includes ecological and social principles, and it works from field level all the way up to the international scale. And there's evidence that agroecology can have positive impacts on food security and nutrition, and there's multiple pathways by which that can happen. And crucially, it pays attention to, an agroecological approach pays attention to power dynamics at multiple levels. And it also, and I won't go into this, but there is evidence that agroecology supports the resilience of food systems long-term by supporting key ecosystem functions like pollination, soil health, and water quality. But to date, there's very limited research or investment in this approach in the scientific community and in the development community. Less than 2%, I think, is an estimate from some recent studies.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much, Rachel. Quite informative discussion there. I'll ask you to give a hand, please. I know she's touched on a number of important issues, which maybe you're having questions. We'll have a time when we'll come and have this discussion. So if you could hold on those questions, because we move to another session. But one thing which is come out clear, Rachel, you've shared, is that when we look at agroecology, we are looking at as an approach. We are looking at principles, and you've tried to suggest some evidence here as it is working. And one thing I find interesting, which members may keep on the question, is farmers are able to save money as there's no fertilizer. Another hand, please, for Rachel, as I invite other. Now, we really want to take this to the context of Malawi by focusing on the organizations that are operating in the country and also hearing their perspective about agroecology. So I have 3 members from Malawi who have quite some experience on agroecology. I have Chifundo Kokwa with me. Chifundo, if you could join us. Yeah, thank you. So Chifundo is a national coordinator for SCOP Malawi, and she's also been participating in what is being referred to as the Malawi Agroecology Hub, obviously having some understanding about agroecology. We brought in to bring an experience. Welcome to Fundo. Another member with us is representing the government, the Minister of Agriculture in particular, the Director of Land Resources Conservation, Mrs. Gertrude Kambaua. Please come to the floor. Quite an experienced person, and at least you given a clap because the gender, in terms of gender here, we're making a plus. A lady heading a whole department. Another applause, please. I know her very well because she has also mentored me now. She was asking me, Frank, why did you leave government? And I had no answer to give her. At least we interact again. Thank you so much, madam, for joining us again. And finally, but not least, is Diamond. Diamond Kambewa is coming from the Lilongwe University of Agriculture, also in the Department of Extension and Rural Development, an enthusiast about agroecology. He's also being a member of the Malawi Agroecology Hub. And I also thought he could give a perspective of the hub as well as the academia in terms of how they are working with agroecology. Welcome, Diamond, and another applause for him, please. Thank you so much, all of you, for joining us. We'll engage here more about agroecology, and I want to begin by first understanding from the perspective of you. 3 minutes, each one of you, just tell us, how are you engaging with agroecology? So that this animal agroecology, and Rachel has broken it down, but how are you engaging with it as institutions in Malawi? Will I start with the government, please?
Thank you very much, our moderator, Dr. Chua. And maybe let me first by thanking the organizers for inviting the ministry through the Department of Land Resources to be part of this panel discussion. Now, by way of introducing how we are engaging in agroecology, what I'm going to say is that our department, which is basically to provide the policy guidance on land management matters, our work is around making sure that we are addressing the issue of land degradation. And there, the problem that we are addressing in the country is on soil erosion, and also that our soils are depleted of the important nutrients for our production. So in our work, we have been promoting interventions with our farmers that will help to restore or to maintain the soil that is remaining, because we've lost a lot of the soil, but also to implement interventions that will help to replenish the nutrients in the soil. So we have a number of interventions that we are promoting, very low cost, so that our farmers are able to adopt. In controlling soil and water soil erosion, we are promoting interventions in soil and water conservation. We are promoting contour ridging, but also making sure that that water doesn't flow away from where it falls. So we are encouraging water harvesting in situ in the fields, and also promoting interventions like intercropping, crop rotations, crop residue incorporation. This is to address now the gaps that are there in the nutrient problems that we are facing with our soils. So in there, what we are doing as a department is basically addressing the issue of agroecology. This is what we've learned, because we've been doing it in a manner that we're just doing to address the problems that we are facing. But over time, and with new information coming in, we are feeding into the paradigm of agroecology, because that's what we're doing. It's about rehabilitating the degraded environment, but also making sure that we are bringing in elements that will help to increase productivity. So in there, we're looking at the issues of soil health, and we are promoting what we call integrated soil fertility management, because in as much as the organic manures are good, we have for a long time been using the organic fertilizers, but now we are trying to balance the utilization of the fertilizers with organics, because we're trying to rehabilitate the production base. So that's what we're doing in terms of agroecology. We're doing actually a lot, but this is in the context of the discussion that we're having here. I thought these are the main elements that I can talk about, but otherwise I may be able to also share more as we continue this conversation. Thank
So
you
there's
very
so
much.
many examples that you've given us, and perhaps trying to raise this point that there is space for government to play in agroecology, starting from policy to engaging farmers.
Well, that is true. In fact, we already have instruments in place that are helping us to do this work. But probably what is remaining is to bring them in the context of what agroecology is. You agree with me that it's a new term, but when you look at the interventions that are being promoted under agroecology, is what we've been doing all along. Only that probably we didn't look at it in that way. But now, because the issue with also climate change is the environment is degraded and it continues to degrade. So we're looking at ways of rebuilding, the production base. So we're looking at any opportunity that will help us to make sure that we have rebuilt the base, and then we're having the volumes that we need. Because in agriculture, we're also talking about commercialization and transforming the agriculture sector. So definitely production and productivity, if it increases, is very important for us. So whatever will help us to get to that so that we have the volumes that are required for the markets, that would be good for us.
All right, so government sees there's a problem and something has to be done about it. Chifundo, as civil society, how are you engaging with this? Government has a role, sees there's a problem, we need to do something about it. Our soils are degrading, for example, we need to do something about it. How, as civil society, have we engaged with this concept of agroecology?
Thank you, Frank. So I work for an organization called the Schools and Colleges Permaculture Malawi. So basically our work is working with schools and young people. So we're engaging with the young people and teaching them about agroecology using the principles that I think Rachel talked about and some of the techniques that Madame Gertrude has just talked about. So basically our role is to catch them young. We all understand, I think there's a saying that says you can't really teach an old dog new tricks. So we really want to start with the young people when they are in school. So basically we work with the young people from the age of even 3 all the way up to 35 years old in tertiary institutions. And we teach them the basic concepts of agroecology to do with soil health, nutrition, as well as water management. So one of the core things that we're also doing in addition to soil health and everything is to also introduce the revival of farmer-saved indigenous seed in Malawi, also talking about farmers' rights in the context of farmer seeds so that we revive our old traditional seed. We also talk about nutrition. I think much like Rachel was talking about introducing the old recipes. Many of you might know that we're losing our old varieties, our old seed, our old food that used to be around. So reintroducing them, reintroducing the taste in these young people so that they are aware of it. They know what is happening. They know what their grandmother used to eat. They know how their grandmother used to eat it. So what we do and how we do this is we use an approach called intergenerational learning, where we have the old and the young working together and learning together in the same platform or in the same space. So we bring them in and they talk about their old stories. What did they used to grow? How did they used to do it? So that the young ones are reminded of what their culture is. So I think this is one very important aspect of agroecology that Rachel mentioned, the use of culture and going back and respecting indigenous foods, respecting indigenous spaces, respecting the indigenous foods that used to be there. So yeah, so this element of culture and bringing it back to the young people. We also work on elements such as water and hygiene, because you cannot do all of this without adequate hygiene and water and sanitation. So we also do all of that in the context of agroecology. Yeah.
So yeah, quite diverse as well. But one thing I like picking it from the government side is that the government is focusing on policy and farmers, and you take the youth side, and also the focus on indigenous and culture. The academia, how do you respond to this? Well, quite different stakeholders taking different aspects of agroecology. How have you, as the academia, taken agroecology?
Thank you very much, the chair, for the session. I'm Diamond Kambewa. I'm with the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources. I will speak wearing two hats, as the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, but as a member of the Agroecology Hub in Malawi as well. What we are doing mostly as a university, as you know, mostly our job is training, and I think we are making efforts to orient students to the whole concept of agroecology. And I'm aware that now even programs are coming up on agroecology, as well as maybe mere topics in some of the courses that students are going through at the university, trying to build and bring more agroecology understanding in the students that are going through the university. This is one of the aspects that we are doing. But as a researcher, we are also working a lot with the farmers to do research on principles of agroecology, as Rachel presented. So we have come up with what we call the farmer research networks, which are a groupings of farmers that we work together with on different aspects of agroecology to see how the different principles or elements are indeed featuring in the different ecological zones in Malawi. And more important, as a hub, we are working to group together, coming together, networking all people that have interest in agroecology in Malawi, and bring them together, have learning sessions now and again about this concept of agroecology, hoping that it's through this learning, through exchange of ideas, that we're able to see people now taking actions on this concept of agroecology. And I think that aspect is also playing a big role, where now every day you see people sharing what is happening in the area of agroecology, what benefits people are drawing on agroecology through the network that we have developed in Malawi on that aspect. If I can stop there, I'll spare some minutes for you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. So it looks like we have this description of agroecology. We're looking at these principles, and I've seen all the panelists. You've touched more on the principles and mentioning different dimensions of agroecology. But I want to bring to your attention, all of you, and this one is for all of you, a recent paper published in Outlook on Agriculture, and has a very catching title: Why Agroecology is a Dead End for Africa. And with this title in mind, I want to hear from your side. Are there any benefits or challenges that you're meeting with this approach? Maybe we're just too excited about it. Yes, who wants to take? I see people excited, and I'd like to give. Diamond, would you like to take this first, or you come last? I'll give it to Rachel. Rachel, you seem to want to take it first. Yes.
I'm very familiar with that article. It came out of an institution that's affiliated with my university that is very heavily promoting biotechnology. And so it was written with that explicit aim, really. Mm-hmm. So I think agroecology poses a real threat to the very powerful commercial interests that sell fertilizer, purchase seed, pesticide. And on the retail side, it's a threat because agroecology promotes small and mid-sized food businesses as opposed to the highly concentrated retail of agro inputs, which is a very, very concentrated industry with very few players who are very powerful. So you will hear a lot of negative comments about agroecology from certain corners, including particular governments. And it's no secret that the United States is one of those governments that is not terribly keen, or up until recently hasn't been very keen on agroecology. And particular funders who see it as problematic. And I think it comes down to this question of power, because it's getting at some of the power dynamics in our food system, which are highly concentrated and have become even more concentrated in the last 2 decades. So on day one of this conference, we talked about the political economy. We didn't hear too much about the agro input side, but they are a very powerful player, and that's part of the picture. That's not to say that there aren't constraints and trade-offs with agroecology, and I'll give space to the others. There certainly are, but it also has had very little investment or research to be able to address those constraints and try to make it feasible. So
Okay.
I'm done here.
So yeah, it's more political and it's boiling. Chifundo, would you want to react to that? Do you have now the Malawi context? Do we have benefits that we can point to as agroecology or challenges?
Yes, certainly there are many benefits and challenges as well. So what the commercial agriculture or industrial agriculture fails to mention is all this chemicalization and its effects on health. We all know they've been over the years, so like Rachel mentioned, there's a serious threat, and as a country we need to position ourselves in such a way that we put agroecology in the right place, because we all know that over the years, for example, the big pharmaceutical companies have been sued over the years over the use of chemical, like the Monsanto lawsuits that they've just recently lost over the years. So there's a really big threat. And so there is a tendency to downgrade what agroecology is doing because it's producing healthier food. People are not buying, or people will not end up buying. And for Malawi, we don't want to model our farming based on what has been happening across or in the West, because our way of farming is different. Our culture is very different. For example, in Malawi, we have very smallholder farmers. These smallholder farmers do not need as many inputs or as many chemical inputs to produce as much, but because we're modeling our agriculture over what has been historically done in the West, we take our models from there. And that is why I think even as we're working as Scope, we talk about what used to be the culture here, what crops used to be grown here, and how can we grow them in a more healthy way without using chemical inputs or without using these kinds of inputs. So we need to look at what foods do we grow that are appropriate to us culturally, and what do they need. But if we model our agriculture based on what everyone else is doing or what the West is doing, then we will fall into these pitfalls where we have to constantly look at what is happening, and this is not able to feed the world.
Would you think of an example of a cultural-based food system, as you're alluding to, where we've seen benefit in the country?
Okay, so a simple example would be crops like millet. Yeah, so if you grow your millet, it doesn't require as much rainfall. It doesn't require as heavily as much input in terms of fertilizers as would all these other things. And you'd find that it's really it's really, very nutritious, and it's nutritiously dense. And so if farmers go to their appropriate diets and what is suited to our Malawian soils and our Malawian environments, our Malawian context, then we won't need as much input.
You raise an important point there to ask ourselves whether maize or millet is our culture. Which one is our culture? Diamond, you've been itching to say something. How do you respond to this? Are there benefits or challenges that we can talk about agroecology in Malawi? Yeah, it's on now.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, for recognizing. The article you're talking about, I think I went through some of the aspects. And when I saw it, I said, yeah, this article is full of selective presentation, selecting what suits a certain group of people, leaving out some evidence which would have counter what is being presented. And I think this is very, very common, and that's the challenge that agroecology is facing. People are trying to compare things which cannot be compared, and they want whatever we're doing as agroecology, compare it with what might come when they use inorganic inputs. But the truth is, this selective approach to evidence is a challenge, and it just downplays and makes agroecology inferior, so that people think, in fact, what we see in the communities, when we talk about agroecology, they talk about them as alternative. That's the language you get. Instead of inorganics, we are using these organics as an alternative to inorganics. It's not an alternative. It's not an alternative. It's not that they don't have inorganics, that's why they have to do organics. That's the challenge that we're having as of now. Agroecology is taking us an alternative. The moment we take agroecology out of that thinking that it's an alternative, then agroecology will find its space, because it has to be done as part and parcel of our food system, the way we're going to do things. The challenges are there. Another one that I see mostly is the concept itself is we are struggling to domesticate it. I think as of now, we are still flying up there. We have not yet settled with the concept, such that to communicate about agroecology, we're still struggling. Climate smart agriculture, traditional farming, what. But when you look at agroecology principles as Rachel presented, what people talk about, they talk about one principle of agroecology instead of talking the whole. And I think this is where one thing that we're struggling with. Instead of talking agroecology as a whole, we are busy talking about components of agroecology. And in the process, it is failing to settle locally. How can we domesticate this concept so that even ordinary people in the communities can speak to it and relate to it as well? It's a big challenge that we're facing. Again, there are now labels. Agroecology is becoming a label for people to wear to attract either funding. Once I write a proposal and put agroecology, it will be funded. If it doesn't have agroecology, it will not be funded. So people are wearing it, but what they're doing, there's very little. But we have evidence generated with the small research that we're doing, where degraded lands are getting restored when you apply agroecological principles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The academia like to emphasize on problems and make things more difficult. But I want to hear from governments. There are all these challenges and benefits being highlighted in Malawi. From the government side, are you seeing any benefits with this agroecology or actual challenges?
All right, so probably just to add on to what my colleagues have already highlighted, for us, we see that there are benefits, and maybe without going into the details, what I want to do is to refer us to the presentation that Rachel has made. Because as a ministry and the country, we've benefited from a lot of research that has gone on before. And what we've been promoting, the examples that I was giving, were results of research that was done. And these are the recommendations that we took on board to scale out amongst our farmers. So whatever has been already presented by Russia is what we have been seeing. And for us, there are benefits because, like I indicated, we are treating the soils that are already degraded and low in nutrients. And with the interventions that we are promoting, we are seeing a difference. The only challenge that we are facing is now in the context of the work that we're doing. Yeah, and also in the context of agroecology, because like I indicated, what we're doing is also fits in very well with agroecology.
Concept, yes.
Is that the uptake is still on the lower side. Although the farmers are able to see the benefits that the technologies that we've been promoting in terms of increasing soil fertility, for example, but also in general managing the environment, because we have a basket of technologies that we promote together as we're reaching out to our farmers. But adoption still remains a challenge. And we've been trying to find out why that is the case. And of course, there have been studies that have been done to give us an insight into what the barriers, for example, to adoption are. And in addressing those barriers, we've been able to come up with other interventions that are also addressing those barriers so that there's increased uptake. But generally, adoption is a problem that we can take to the farmers. But why is it that they're not taking them up? We've done demonstrations and the results are good. But when we ask them to do the same interventions, they're not doing it. But of course, there are some that are doing it and they are going on with promoting and scaling up actually these interventions. So that's the main challenge that we are seeing with agroecology in the context of the work that we are promoting. Yeah.
So it's very common in Malawi, in the context, for those who don't know the Malawi context, if you go in the rural areas, you go to talk about these options, farmers will be singing and dancing, and yet you only see portions of these options. You don't see them the whole farm. So that's what you're referring to, Madam Director. I want to close this one and move on to the question around the climate smart agriculture versus agroecology, the debate. Are they one thing or they're different?
I think climate smart agriculture is a more narrow term, and it's much more focused on climate mitigation through agriculture. Of course, agroecology can involve mitigation. If you're adding soil carbon, increasing soil carbon, for example, if you're incorporating agroforestry trees into your system, but it goes much more beyond mitigation. So climate smart agriculture is a more narrow, I think, technical term, but agroecology can have climate mitigation practices broader term. And I just want to come to this point of feeding the cities and think about the context of climate change. I had the privilege of serving on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change for the last 3 years, working, before this, anyways. It wasn't this year, but I finished it last year. And I led the chapter on food systems. And it's just really, we talked about agriculture and climate having an unhappy marriage. It's more than an unhappy marriage in another session. It's an unhappy marriage with an addiction problem. And that addiction problem is the fossil fuel that is underpinning industrial agriculture. It's underpinning commercial agriculture. And the IPCC was really clear that we need to transition our food systems to be ecosystem-based, to rely on natural processes for food production and to move away from reliance on synthetic inputs, because that's part of what's really making our food systems at grave risk and strong threats. And of course, in Malawi, we know those threats are very real and already being experienced. So I think if you think about the long term, can agroecology feed Africa? Can it feed systems? We need to transition our food systems off of fossil fuels if we want Africa to be able to feed itself in the future, or Africa will be facing, extreme heat, drought, floods, and all those very severe impacts that are already being experienced in Africa now and will be experienced even more in the future unless we transition our food systems. Okay, now I'll stop.
So the common denominator is phosphate. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had quite a fruitful discussion. We've looked at agroecology around as an approach, agroecology as based on principles, several principles. We've looked at the evidence, cases from Malawi, and tried to discuss on some of the benefits and challenges that are facing agroecology. And one thing I'm learning in terms of agroecology here is really it is a practice, a science, and a movement that will need some political will. At this point, let me thank the panelists and the presenter. A hand for them, please.